I would say good morning, a great Zechus Baruch Hashem to be able to learn with all of you. Sorry I can't be there physically, but at least Zechus Baruch Hashem to be able to learn virtually, spiritually together, beginning by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson Mishpacha B'Eretz Yisrael. Today is Reb Naftali Tilson's father's yahrzeit, Yona ben Avraham Lev, a true survivor, a proud partisan, deeply loved Torah, Am Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael. And Reb Naftali writes, his strength, values, and devotion continue to inspire me each and every day. But first of all, we'll say we should just all be zocheh Meretz Hashem that our children, after 120, should be able to make such dedications about us like that. Absolutely beautiful, incredible. And Neshama should have an aliyah, and Meretz Hashem, the family in Nechama. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Haba Alinu Latova, Aaron and Alana Weinberg, for the miracles of Hashem, both the revealed and the hidden, for the miracle of Yonatan Shai, 14 years ago, in the schus of the speedy arrival of Mashiach Mihira B'Yameinu, Amen. And Daniel and Batsheva Pava B'Eretz Yisrael, dedicating all of Sherman Drushos this month, Le'ilui Nishmas Reb Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Vei. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Nisham Sav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah Shabbat together with Kol L'Cholei Yisrael Yisrael, should the merit Hashem bring home all of our holy hostages and allow our precious soldiers to be successful. B'chol Maaseh Yedehem. We both say today's daf is Lamed Hey 35, and we are picking up a Meretz Hashem on Lamed Daled Beis, a really beautiful and incredible Gemara ahead of us today. So we are picking up at the two dots on the bottom of 34b, Lamed Daled Amud Beis. It is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom. The Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Sha'ar Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Rav Achtabai, Amar Rav, HaMekadish Beperesh Shahar Niskal Mekudeshas. It's an interesting case over here. Reuven goes over to Rachel, and remember again, he wants to marry her. In order to effect Kiddushin, a man has to give a woman an item of value. What does Reuven give Rachel? He gives her the excrement of a Shar HaNiskal. Peresh Shar HaNiskal. Okay? So Rashi points out over here, Shar HaNiskal Aser Ba'anohu. So he gives her the excrement of the Shar HaNiskal. So ultimately, again, the halacha is she's Mekudeshas. Now, lav dafka she should marry a guy like this, but okay, leaving aside the lack of romantic overtones in this particular gesture of Kiddushin, but Lamais, again, the Gemara says, Rav says, it works. On the other hand, the parish Agle Avoda Skochalim in Mekudeshas. If a man, if Reuven is Mekadesh a woman with the excrement of a calf of Avoda Zara, she's not Mekudeshas. Okay, so interesting. So apparently not all excrement created the same. If it's from Shar HaNiskal, now again, by the way, a Shar HaNiskal is a shar that has killed a person, and therefore the shar itself is executed, and therefore the shar itself is Asr Ba'ana. A calf of Avoda Zara, we know what that is. So again, if you use the excrement of the Shar HaNiskal, it works. Excrement of the shar for Avoda Zara doesn't work. So why the distinction? So the Gemara says it could either be based on a svar, in other words, I could either espouse a logical argument for this or base it on a pasuk. So what's the logic? So this is very interesting. By an animal of Avoda Zara. So the truth is, remember, when the excrement is inside the animal, so ultimately, again, the excrement makes the animal feel a little bit more bloated. By the way, perish usually refers to, let's say, excrement that's still left, like in the intestines and things like that. Lav dafka, that it's been actively excreted, but it could be in the inside of the animal also. So by the egal of Avoda Zara, the fatter the animal, right? The more zaftig the animal, the more covered that is to the Avoda Zara. So therefore, again, the peresh, the excrement, is actually value added in an Avoda Zara case. But again, by Shar HaNiskal, the animal is going to be executed anyway. It doesn't make a difference if the animal is large or smaller. Makes absolutely no difference. So the Gemara says, so that's the svara. That's the svara. Ibaisim akra, goes to be a pasuk. It says by Avoda Zara that you can't hold on to anything. So anything associated with Avoda Zara, by definition, is going to be aser. Therefore, even the excrement is going to be aser. Uksiv hasam sakol yisakel hashar. You have to stone the shar, it's going to die, and you can't eat the meat. What do you see from here? Besoro aser haper shemuteres. The prohibition, the prohibited status only devolves upon the flesh, doesn't devolve upon the excrement. So we'll say, so incredible. So the point over here is that halacha l'maisa, no one seems to be arguing on this. A man could be mekadesh a woman with the excrement of a shor haniskal, because essentially that excrement is not aser ba'ana. And again, it does have value, it's fertilizer, it has value. So therefore a man could be mekadesh a woman with that. On the other hand, the excrement of the calf of Avoda Zara, that is aser ba'ana. So again, either based on a pasuk or based on a svara. Amar Rava says, Tarvaihu taninhi. The truth is, both of these can be gleaned ultimately from our Mishnah. How so? So going back to the interesting conversations about cheeses, midika amar le mipnei shema amidin bekevas nevela, v'kama hadra le v'alo kevas ola chamura mekevas nevela. So remember again, in the Mishnah there was a discussion which we're going to get into today about why is it that cheese of an akum is prohibited. So one of the answers that the Gemara gave and that the Mishnah gave was because they curdle it in the stomach of an avela. So the Gemara says, and then the Gemara answers, or the Mishnah shoots back, but yet we learned that halacha l'maisa, again, the stomach of an ola seems to have a greater chumrah than the stomach of just stam an animal. After all, again, remember again, the Gemara is saying, yet chamura mekevas nevela. So Rashi says, tap of lamed hey michlal the isure hana sharo per shayhu. This is very interesting. So the Gemara says, now what you could infer from this is that halacha l'maisa. So remember, what are you curdling? What are you curdling the milk with? The rennet. That's the rennet that's in the stomach. So what you see from here is that in general, even an item that is prohibited by Avoda Zara, in an Isser Hana, prohibited from benefit, that which is considered to be like excreted, and that would include also like the renin in the stomach of the animal, ultimately again is mutter bahana. And then again, afterwards it says that ultimately again, because they curdle the cheese in the stomach, bekevas egle avodas kochavim, the kamahadjale imkain lama lo asrua ba'ana, and ultimately then they shot back, if that's the case, that they're curdling the cheese in the stomach of the Avoda Zara animal, then ultimately the cheese shouldn't only be aser ba'ana, but aser ba'achila, it should also be aser ba'ana. It should be aser on both counts. So what do you see from here? You see from here that when it comes to idolatry, really every single part of the animal ultimately again is considered to be aser ba'ana. Even the lashon, by the way, of pirsha means something that's separate, which usually also means something that's unimportant in the grand scheme of the animals. What you begin to see is that when it comes to Avoda Zara, because of the stringency, because of the strictness of the prohibition, everything becomes prohibited by an Avoda Zara animal, including the renin in the stomach, including ultimately, again, the excrement, whether it was excreted or whether it's still, let's say, inside of the body at the time that the animal is slaughtered. Everything that's part of that animal becomes aser ba'ana. Again, going back to our original discussion, as opposed to shor haniskal. By shor haniskal, the halacha is if the shor kills someone, you have to stone the shor, and the Torah says the meat is aser. It's the meat that's aser, but ultimately, again, anything else that's considered to be pirsha, insignificant for the animal, halacha l'maisa is not mutter ba'ana. It's not aser ba'ana, It's not aser ba'ana. And therefore, again, coming full circle, that's why a man can be mekadesh a woman with the excrement of a shor haniskal, because that is not aser ba'ana, therefore it has a value, but cannot be mekadesh a woman with the excrement of an Avoda Zara animal. Because in that case, the Avoda Zara status devolves upon all parts of the animal. Incredible. But one second. I don't understand. In general, even if halacha l'maisa, right? Let's go back to the cheese case, right? So now we're saying that the cheese of an akum is going to be aser because they curdle it in the stomach of an Avoda Zara animal. But why can't you just say, even if that's true, let's say we're using the renin, we're using the enzyme of the Avoda Zara animal's stomach. It's no longer present in the final mixture. So because it's no longer present, essentially what I'm saying is it should be bottle. It should really be bottle. It should be ultimately nullified in the greater mixture. It's no longer visible. It's no longer in existence. And ultimately, again, it should be bottle. Because again, for example, when it comes to murias is the fish oil. That according to the Rabbanan, ultimately, again, according to the Rabbanan, the lo asru ba'ana. Ultimately, again, the rabbis did not asr it ba'ana. My taima, what's the reason? Lav mishum delese li isura be'enei. Ultimately, again, because the isser itself is not extant. Amrihachi kevan de ukibna kamokim chashiv lakiman de isi li isura be'enei. This is very important. You're right. It could very well be that in general, that renin, the enzyme from the stomach that coagulates, that causes the cheese to curdle, ultimately, again, should be batal. One could make that argument. The issue over here, Bosai, this is a big sugya in Maseches Chulin as well. It's what's called a davar hamaimid. Davar hamaimid is something essentially that is responsible for the creation of something else. You can't make cheese without the renin, right? You need that enzyme in order to cause the cheese to coagulate. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, even though you may not be able to see it, right? Or even though you may not be able to notice its presence, but halacha l'maisa, we know that there's no cheese without it. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, it's not batal. So this happens to have far-reaching consequences and implications in other areas of halacha as well, but just interesting to know. So therefore, again, the Gemara is kind of leaving off over here. Again, we're going to get more into cheeses. We're not finished with it yet, but here the Gemara highlighting the idea. First of all, again, we have an interesting halacha when it comes to kiddushin. You can be mekadesh woman with the excrement of a shar haniskel because it's not prohibited ba'ana, but you can't be mekadesh woman with the excrement of an Avoda Zara animal, either based on svara or based on a pasuk. Interestingly enough, if you curdle the cheese, kosher cheese, so to speak, in the stomach of an Avoda Zara animal, it's going to be aser. But isn't it batal? It's not batal. Why? Because it's a maimid. It's a mamid. It's something that creates something else, something that has that heightened level of importance. By definition, is not batal. Which will say, if you think about it, is a really beautiful thought, right? That something that is responsible for the establishment of something else, even if that original ingredient is no longer visible, it's never batal. And I think even in the world of ruchnius, when you think about this, often we speak about or we think about spiritual success in the realm of what do we do for ourselves. But it is important for us to remember that at the end of the day, as important as what we do for ourselves is the growth that we enable in others. The Svarim bring down that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu, Geri Azar Acha, Hashem says to Avram Avinu, your offspring is going to be like the stars in the sky, right? Like the sand on the shore. And of course, everyone asks the same question. It never happened, right? Klal Yisrael, we've never been as numerous in the stars. We've never been like the sand on the sea. So what does it mean? So there's a simple idea. Avram Avinu was the first monotheist. Avram Avinu introduced humanity to the Ribono Shel Olam. So while it's true that different segments of humanity kind of went in different directions, but Lamaisa Avram Avinu is responsible for ruchnius in this world. Avram Avinu is the father of monotheism. And again, every major faith traces itself back to an Avram Avinu, to an Abrahamic patriarch. So Avram Avinu, to Avram, more than even what you're going to accomplish as an individual, is the growth that you're going to enable in humanity, in all of the world. And it's just so incredibly important because sometimes the greatest things that we accomplish in this world are not the things we accomplish for ourselves, but it's the inspiration we give to others and it's the enabling of growth in others. And sometimes people never even know what we did. They never even know our role. But what's the halacha? A maimid is never batal. If you help to establish something else, by definition, even if it can't be seen or no one knows about it, it's there. And it never fully disappears. It always remains present. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Remember again, after there was this whole discussion with Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Shmuel, so ultimately again, Rabbi Shmuel switched the conversation to a different topic. Let me just make sure it was in fact Rabbi Shmuel. Yes, so Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yoshua, right. So I'm sorry, Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yoshua, so why is it that there is an isser of cheese from an akum? And then Rabbi Yoshua ultimately went ahead and switched the topic. And he started quoting a pasuk from Shir HaShirim. So the Gemara says, Mai ki tovim dodecha miyayin. So first of all, again, before the Gemara gets into why Rabbi Yoshua felt the need to switch the conversation, ultimately the Gemara examines the pasuk. The pasuk in Shir HaShirim, for your love is better than wine. So the Gemara says, This is a beautiful Gemara. So this is Klal Yisrael speaking to Hashem. And what did Klal Yisrael say? Ribono Shel Olam, Arevim alai divrei dodecha, yoser miyena shel Torah. This is beautiful. Klal Yisrael says, Baruch Hu, the words of your beloved ones. Who are the beloved ones? Rashi points out over here, Divrei Dodecha, Divrei Sofrim. The words of Chazal. The words of Chazal are even more precious to us than the words of Torah itself. You hear what this is saying? We love the Dirabbanans even more than the Doraisos. The words of Chazal are even more precious to us than the words of the Torah itself. The Gemara says, I'm sorry, right? Good. So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, so what's the pshat with that, right? What exactly does that mean that Klal Yisrael says we love the Rabbanans more than the Doraisos? So on a very basic level, remember again, Doraisas, right? Psukim are handed to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We didn't do anything for that. The Rebbe Shalom gave it to us. He handed it to us. But Lamais, when it comes to the Rabbanans, we worked for that. That's Chazal going through the system. That's Chazal plowing through the sugyas. That's Chazal trying to understand what's the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what's going to help us make us better people. So the Rabbanan is the result of human effort. Torah is not human effort. Torah HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to us. So Klal Yisrael says, what's nearest and dearest to us is the stuff we had to work for. You know, so often we think we like to get things handed to us. We think that we prefer just to have things kind of given to us on a silver platter, but it's not true. The things that you get handed to you on a silver platter are very nice, very easy, very beautiful. But the things you have to work for, the things you have to toil for, the things you have to schwitz for, at the end of the day, those are the things that really are meaningful in life. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna haikra de shayle." So why this pasuk? Right? Why did they choose this pasuk? Really, because he was focusing on the beginning of the pasuk. What's the beginning of the pasuk? The Gemara says, "Yishakini minashikos piu," because the pasuk says, "Kiss me with the kisses of your mouth." Amar le Yishmael achi. So really, Rabbi Yeshua was kind of giving Rabbi Shmuel a little bit of veiled rebuke. He says, what does it mean? Chashok sifasecha sifsosecha zubazu. Press your lips together, which is a nice way of saying, be quiet. Remember, Rabbi Shmuel was asking Rabbi Yeshua, why is it that Chazal prohibited the cheese of an akum? To which Rabbi Yeshua responds, Yishakini min hashikos piu. Close your lips. Close your lips. Don't stop talking. And don't try to ask questions right now. Don't ask questions. Now, my time, what does it mean, don't ask questions? Why not? Why? Because interesting enough, when they were having this conversation, this was a new gzera. This was a new rabbinic prohibition. And when it comes to new rabbinic prohibition, we don't go ahead and ask questions. Now we'll see why that is. We'll see why that is in just a moment. The Gemara says, so therefore again, apparently it was brand new that Chazal legislated you can't eat the cheese of an akum. Rabbi Shmuel is asking, why? What? Rabbi Shmuel says, Shah, yishakini min hashikos piu, right? Literally close your lips. And then once he quoted the beginning of the pasuk, he actually then extrapolated or expounded on the end of the pasuk. Beautiful. So Gemara says, my gzera. So first of all, again, what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, mishum nikur. Ultimately, again, the Gemara says, because of Nikar. Now we'll see exactly, V'lei mishum Nikar. Ultimately, again, so say the Gemara, right. So the Gemara says, so say, why don't you go ahead and ultimately give the reason for the Gzera? So the Gemara suggests, we'll see what Nikar is in just a moment. So the Gemara says, why not just go ahead and say that it's because of Nikar? In other words, we're concerned about a small amount of something impure being mixed in. So the Gemara says, because Ula said, what did Ula say about say? This is incredible. So the Gemara says, Ula the Amar Ula ki gazu gzerasa v'ma'arava lo miglu taima atresa yarche shasa. So Ula says something very interesting. Chazal had a rule. What was their rule? What was Chazal's rule? Whenever they legislated a new halacha, they would not reveal the reason for it for 12 months. That's the way they did it. They wouldn't reveal it for 12 months. Why? I'll say it's very interesting. What's the problem with giving reasons for things? The problem with giving reasons to things is that there's always going to be someone who thinks the reason doesn't apply to him, the reason is not good enough, it's not solid enough, it doesn't make sense. This is incredible. It's almost like Chazal understood what every parent, right? Every parent has that moment where, of course, I want to tell my child they have to do something, and of course you're going to have to reason with them, I'd like to talk with them, but it happens that a parent reaches a point and says, listen, this is what we're going to do. Why? Because I said so. Because I said so. And the truth is, it happens to be in chinuch that's an important yesod as well, right? Children need not be privy to the logic of every single parental decision. And children need not be a partner in the creation of every single parental policy. Parents have a prerogative to say, this is what is going to happen, or this is not what's going to happen. Why? Because I said so. Now, obviously, as a child gets older and their comprehension expands, we can potentially bring them into the decision-making process, even when they get older. Sometimes the parent just has to say, this is what it is. Why? Because the moment you start getting into reasons is the moment that everybody is a big chacham. So Chazal, this is fascinating, Chazal had this policy that whenever they instituted a new law, for 12 months after the law was first established, we don't talk about the reasoning. We want to go ahead and just kind of legislate it, have it become part of just general behavior of Klal Yisrael. Then afterwards, we can, it's fascinating. So after 12 months, when everybody again is kind of like this behavioral habituation, then we could talk about the reason. But for the first 12 months, do it. Which of us it tells us so that we keep seeing over and over again in Yiddishkeit, which is so much of what it means to be a good Jew, is to be a good soldier. I understand it, I don't understand it, I agree with it, I don't agree with it, I appreciate it, I don't appreciate it. It's not a democracy. The Ribbon Shalom knows what's best for us. Chazal know what's best for us, and our job is to really exercise that obedience muscle and to be able to say, Hineni, I'm here, I'm ready, I accept, I'm going to be imperfect and make a lot of mistakes, but I'm fully bought in. So the Gemara says, Megadeh bar Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah gestured when he heard this. Ani ata yavsha tishtari. So we'll say, so the Gemara says as follows. Now remember again, the nikar. So okay, I was going to say it for later. Let's say now. The nikar means that nikar literally means like a hole in it. So what's that? It's reference to a snake venom. So apparently, what Chazal were originally concerned about when it came to cheese was that there may be snake venom in it. The Gemara says, okay, snake venom. But if that's the case, the Gemara says, if the cheese dries, then it should be permitted. Why? Because why? So we'll say, because ultimately, again, if there's snake venom apparently wouldn't allow cheese to dry out. So if the cheese dries, then by definition, there's no venom there. If there's no venom, then it should be permitted. The Gemara says, Yashan mutter, similarly, again, aged cheese should also be permitted. Why? Because snake venom would prevent it from aging. So if that's the case, that Chazal legislated about cheese because they were afraid that perhaps the akum wasn't careful with snake venom, there's an easy way to tell if the cheese has snake venom or not. If it has no liquid, right? If it dried out, then it has no venom. If it aged, it has no venom. No, you're right. There's another issue. The issue is that ultimately, again, it is impossible for there to be cheese without some milk residue inside of it. Now, what does that mean? If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi's lefishi afshar legvina below tzitzuchei chalav, ben guma shel gvina nishar min hachalav, v'chalav shechal v'ovid kochavim ein yisaro eyo aser dilma arev bechalav tameh. There's a different concern. Perhaps if the akum is using cheese, right, using milk to make cheese, so maybe he mixed in some non-kosher milk there, and therefore again, cheese always, apparently, at least times in the Gemara, always had like some milk residue with it. Maybe that milk residue is ultimately again from the cheese or from the milk of a non-kosher animal. Okay, now happens to be good. So Rashi points out over here. We will leave Rashi for later. But so again, Rabbi Chanina introduced. So again, first opinion, Ula. What's the reason ultimately again for the issue of cheese of an akum? Snake venom. Rabbi Chanina, no, that's not it because of the reasons we just mentioned. Rather, it's an issue that maybe the akum mixed in some non-kosher milk, and some of the milk residue ultimately again will be non-kosher milk. Now, by the way, it happens to be the Gemara understands that for whatever the reason, non-kosher milk would not coagulate properly. So therefore, again, it's not really a concern that the non-kosher milk is going to get baked into the cheese, but it's in the cheese residue itself, in the milk residue in the cheese, there's going to be non-kosher milk. Shmuel says, "Mipnei shema'amidin also ba'ar kevas nevela." Interesting. So Shmuel says, what's the issue? The issue is that they take an actual piece of the stomach and use it to curdle the cheese. So this is what's interesting. Beforehand, we were talking about using an enzyme in the stomach. So one can make the argument that maybe the enzyme is like a pirsha. It's like a nothing, it's like excrement. But once you're actually using a piece of the stomach itself, that's not pirsha. That's mamish nevela. So therefore, again, Shmuel's concern is actual nevela in the cheese. So the Gemara says, Hag keva gufa sharia. The Gemara said, well, 1 second. But kiva itself, so here what's interesting, by the way, you could see is, the inference from this is that according to Shmuel, only the stomach itself is problematic. But apparently if they were to use the enzyme in the stomach, the renin in the stomach, that would be fine. But did Shmuel say that? Right? Literally again, the stomach, right, of an animal used for Avoda Zara or of an Avela is aser. I don't understand. The animal sacrifice, the animal that Akum uses for his Avodah Zarah is also an Avela. So why do you have to say either an animal of Avodah Zarah or an Avela, right? They're both Nevelas. From Shmuel Chadakatani, Shmuel says, you're right, it's really saying one thing. Kevas Shchitas Avoda Ovid Kochavim Nevela Asura. Ultimately, Shmuel says that the shchita of an animal for Avodah Zarah, ultimately again is an Avela, and therefore again, the stomach material, the enzyme ultimately again is going to be aser. So halacha l'maisa again, you see Shmuel saying over here that the enzyme is aser. Beforehand, yet right above, it sounds like Shmuel saying that the enzyme is mutter. So what's going on over here? Lokasha, we'll say Amud Beis 35b. Lokasha kan kodim chazara, kan li'achar chazara. This is before Shmuel retracted his opinion. This is after he retracted his opinion. Rashi says over kan kodim chazara. Osa mishnah deshchita schulin dekevas ovid kochavim nevela va'asura nishnis kodem shechazar bar Rabbi Yoshua midvarav shamar lo Rabbi Shmuel b'pnei shema amidin osa bekevas nevela v'savar lav pirshu. So essentially, again, these two statements were made at two different times. One was before the retraction. One was after the retraction. But ultimately, again, the Mishnah halacha l'maisa went ahead and remained in its place. So in other words, the original ruling that halacha l'maisa, again, it was going to be fine, was based on the fact they were only using an enzyme, and according to that opinion, the enzyme would be pirsha. Later on, when the Gemara says that it's aser, ultimately is referring to the fact that they're actually using not simply the enzyme, but rather halacha l'maisa, they're actually going ahead and using an actual piece of the stomach itself, which halacha l'maisa will be aser. Rashi says, "V'kan la'achar chazara hach deshani shol meisham amidin osa ba'ar aval keva atzma sharia la'achar chazara shechazur Rabbi Yeshua b'bdei teshuvas al shal Rabbi Yishmael." So again, originally, that halacha l'maisa, again, Rabbi Yeshua thought that halacha l'maisa, the enzyme was aser. Then afterwards, when he heard Rabbi Shmuel's statement back in the Mishnah, he retracted that position and said the issue is not that they use the enzyme, but rather the issue is that they use an actual piece of the stomach itself. Incredible. We'll see the halacha l'maisa. I know I owe you a lot of halacha l'maisa, but I promise we'll get to it. Second line down from the top, Lamed Hem base 35. Ramalkim Mishmei Rav Ada Bar Ava Amar. So we'll say these are all different interpretations as to why cheese of an akum is problematic. So Malkia says because they coat the cheese with pig lard, with pig fat. Okay? So the Gemara says, so Rav Chisda Amidin also bechometz. They use vinegar. They use vinegar to make the cheese, and vinegar, of course, comes from wine. Wine, it would be a problem of yayin nesach. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amidin also besraf ha'arla. Interestingly enough, they use the sap of arla fruit, or I should say the sap of arla, in order to go ahead and make the cheese. So the Gemara says, Kiman, whose opinion does that reflect? Ki haitan of the sign of Elazar Omer, Hamamid b'sarfa arla aser b'beishu peri. If one uses, so we'll say arla, remember again, refers to fruit in its first 3 years, that it's the right, we plant the tree, first 3 years of fruit, it's arla, you cannot get benefit from it, can't utilize it. So the Gemara says that if you go ahead and you create cheese, you use the sap of arla as a coagulant, it's ultimately usher because the sap has the same status as the fruit. To which the Gemara says, no. Even Rabbi Yeshua would agree with this. Ad kan l'pal Rabbi Yeshua alei Rabbi Elazar ela bekitfa deguza ava bekitfa depeira modi. Because even Rabbi Yeshua, he only argues on what's called kitfa deguza, which means the sap that comes out of the tree. Rabbi Yeshua says that the sap that comes out of the tree does not have the status of fruit. But everyone agrees that the sap that comes out of fruit, of course, does have the status of fruit, has the status of arla. So Rabbi Yeshua, Shamati beferush, Shamamid bisrafa ha'alin or bisrafa ikarin mutter. I heard explicitly that if you go ahead and you use the sap of the leaves or the sap of the tree itself for cheese, that ultimately, again, the cheese will be mutter because the sap of the tree or the sap of the leaves does not have the status of the fruit. However, bisraf ha'pagin asr memeshu peri. But if you use the actual sap of the fruit, ultimately again that is going to be asr. Why? Because that is the status of arla. Okay? So Gemara says as follows: Bein l'Rav Chisda, bein l'Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, tisser ba'ana. So here's what's interesting. Both according to Rav Chisda. Remember again, Rav Chisda says that Allah L'maisa, the reason why cheese of an akum is asr is because they use vinegar in it, and therefore vinegar comes from yayin. Yayin of an akum, wine of an akum is yayin nesach. That's Rav Chisda. Rav Nachman, they use the sap of arla. But both according to Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman, cheese of an akum should not only be asr ba'achila for consumption, but should also be asr ba'ana, because vinegar of an akum is asr ba'ana, comes from wine. Sap of arla, it is asr ba'ana. But yet again, they only say that it's asr ba'achila. So what's going on over here? Kasha. The Gemara says, you know what? It's a question. It's a question. Okay, so we'll say, so just want to point out how fascinating this is just to see all of these different opinions, right? So we have Ula, Rabbi Chanina, Shmuel, Rav Malkiah, Rav Chisda, and Rav Nachman. 6 different opinions as to why Chazal went ahead and legislated that you're not allowed to go ahead and eat the cheese of an akum. Again, halacha l'maisa, we'll hopefully bring it all together. Dar Rav Nachman read Rav Chisda. Might say, what's the meaning of the pasuk? The reach shmanecha tovim. So we'll say this is very beautiful. What does it mean? Quoting over here again from Shir Hashirim. The reach shmanecha tovim. So literally again, the scent of your oils is beautiful. This is beautiful. To what can a Talmid Chacham be compared? Litzluchis shel plaiton. It could be compared to ultimately a flask of perfume. Megula, if the flask is open, reicha nodev, then its scent is able to waft. People are able to smell the scent. Mechusa, if the flask is closed, ein reicha nodev. Ultimately, the scent cannot waft. The scent doesn't go anywhere. So I will say how beautiful this is. In other words, at the end of the day, what makes the Talmid Chacham great? It's not the knowledge that he amasses for himself, but rather, again, it's his willingness and ability to share with others. It goes back, it's reminiscent, harkens back to what we learned in Amud Aleph, that a davar hamaimid, something that establishes something else, is never bottled. The greatness of a Talmid Chacham is not simply, or does not lie in his own personal achievements, or solely lie in his personal achievements, but it lies in his ability to share with his beautiful aroma, his beautiful scent, his beautiful Torah, to engender and enable growth within others. So beautiful. Not only that, when a Talmid Chacham shares of his own, and both say it's beautiful, the metaphor is beautiful. A Talmid Chacham who doesn't share, so what is he like? He's like a perfume bottle with a stopper inside of it. What happens with a perfume bottle? So again, everyone knows, it's very nice perfume. But what benefit is there? Zero, because no one could smell it. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, not only that, but when you share your Torah with others, things that initially you don't understand, you'll come to understand. I will say this can be both just on a basic level and a deeper level. On a basic level, when you teach something, you understand it better. So even things I didn't understand myself, if I teach it now, I begin to understand a little bit better. Also, it's Siyata D'Shmaya. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, if I see that you're giving of your ruchnius to other people, then by definition, I'm going to help you amass even more. Shnei Amar, Alamos Ayvucha. Karibei Alumos. Read it instead of alamos, rather as alumos. Alum means hidden. So that which is hidden will become beloved to you. Not only that, Ella Shemalach Hamavas Olavo. The Malach Hamavas becomes your best friend. Shabbos said, this is really incredible. If you become a kind of person who gives selflessly to others, especially of his ruchnius, you teach others, you share your Torah, you share your abilities, you share your kohos with others, even the Malach Hamavas comes to admire you. Now, say, what's the pshat with that? So it could very well be that in general, when the Malach Hamavis comes to take a life, so perhaps, unfortunately, he doesn't feel that the world is going to miss this person that much. Because unfortunately, all too often in life, we underperform. So the Malach Hamavis comes to claim the neshama, okay. But when the Malach Hamavis sees someone who's really like firing on all cylinders, Malach Hamavis sees someone ultimately, again, who's not just amassing personal greatness, but is taking up all of his kiddush and sharing it with others. The Malach Hamavas Kiviyachol falls in love with such a person. So you want to make the Malach Hamavas your friend? I don't know if guy you want to invite to the party, but if you want to make the Malach Hamavas your friend, at the end of the day, be the kind of person who takes what he has, the spiritual treasures that you possess, and make sure to share it with others. Incredible. The Gemara says, "Shneimar alamos ayvucha karibei al maves." It's a contraction there. Elo shenocho shnei olamos. Furthermore, if you take your Torah and you share it with others, you take your ruchnius and you share it with others, you inherit 2 worlds. Echad olam hazeh, the echad olam haba. This world and the next world. Shneimar alamos karibei olamos. Read it as worlds. Rabbi is so beautiful. A person who takes of his ruchnius, a person who takes the stopper off of his beautiful bottle of spiritual perfume and allows the scent to go ahead and give to others and do for others. Such a person like that, Olam Haba I know is going to be great. But my Olam Hazeh, this world becomes so much better when I know that I'm a giver to others. This world becomes so much better when I know that I'm an enabler of growth within others. This world becomes so much better when I know that I'm not just living for me, but somehow I'm living for the klal, I'm living for the collective, I'm living for the other. Incredible Mishnah. The following are items, but it is not an Isser Hana. So what are these items? If an akum milked an animal and a Yisrael wasn't watching him. So again, I'll say here we have the concern about an akum mixing in non-kosher milk. So because of that, you can't eat it, but it's not Asr Ba'ana. Va'pas v'hashemen shalem. Furthermore, you can't eat the bread baked by a non-Jew, nor can you use the oil of a non-Jew. Rabbi and his Beis Din, they permitted the use of oil. Okay, obviously we have to fill in the blanks over there what this is talking about. So the Gemara says, hashlakos, cooked vegetables, right? So if an akum cooks vegetables, you can't eat that cooked item. Ukvashim, pickled items or preserved items. Shedarkan loses lasochen yain b'chomet. So if there are pickled items, now let's say again, normally you would introduce wine or vinegar. You cannot use that if that comes from an akum, again, because of the concern of wine or vinegar. So we'll say, so again, v'taris trufa. Taris trufa, this is interesting. Rashi says, taris trufa is min dagim ketana maluchim. Taris, we've seen this before, is this small variety of fish. Trufa ultimately means it's cut up into small pieces, mashed, or, it's a better word than mashed. Yeah, all right, diced. So it's very small pieces. The problem just is if you get this from an akum, you can't tell what other types of fish may be mixed into this as well. Vitzir, she'im bo dog kilbis shotetes bo. And seer is brine, and if it's a brine that does not have the kilbis fish swimming around in it. Now Rashi says over here, shederech kilbis ligadol me'eleh b'tzir shel dagim torim v'myesh tzir dag tame imo lo tigadol kilbis fi atzmo tmeah. Interestingly enough, we'll see that apparently the presence of this kilbis fish somehow indicated that the brine was kosher. Again, we'll explain this more in the Gemara exactly what's happening over here. Next, vachilik. What's chilik? Rashi says, min dagim ketanim torim v'his sultanis. We learned this in yesterday's daf actually. Chilik is a small variety of fish called sultanis. Now, when the fish is young, we saw this in yesterday's daf, it doesn't have fins and scales. Ve'im lo snapir v'kas kesses, v'asi l'gadol ha'achras ma'snapir v'kas kesses, v'kaimlan demuteres. So ultimately, again, and yet halacha l'maisa, we see that it's mutter. So also I see, interestingly enough, when it comes to the chilik, this small fish, you can't buy it from a Gentile. Why? Because you could easily mix in other non-kosher species, and you may not be able to discern them. Korat shel chiltis. Similarly, again, about say, so chiltis we'll see is a type of grain. You can't go ahead and eat this from an akum either. Why not? So Rashi says, interestingly enough, this is a different issue. This is because when they would harvest this item, they would often use their knives. And because the knife of an akum could have shmutz, non-kosher shmutz or other stuff on it, therefore you can't eat this chiltis. So we'll say, obviously, we're going to go ahead. Rashi points out over here, it's asr because of literally there may be non-kosher residue on the knife. Obviously, we're going to explain each of these categories in the Gemara. Umelech shalkudonis or shalkundis. You also can't use shalkundis salt. Rashi says, we'll see in the Gemara what this means. All of these items, all these items will both say again, you cannot eat it, and there's an isser achila, you're not allowed to consume it, but there is no isser no, you can get benefit from these items. I asked the Gemara Chalov, let's start. So the milk of a non-Jew, you can't drink the milk of a non-Jew. What do you have to be concerned about? So I'll say, ultimately, if you're concerned that the non-Jew is going to put in their non-kosher milk, apparently non-kosher milk looks different than kosher milk. There's different colorations. So therefore, again, there's no way you can get away with that. So I'll say, and if you're afraid that maybe he's going to have kosher milk, but he's going to mix in there some additional non-kosher milk, so you won't be able to see it. Very simple. First of all, make cheese from it. Damar chalav tar omet, chalav tameh ein amoed. His Mar said, ultimately, kosher milk could coagulate into cheese. Non-kosher milk apparently can't coagulate into cheese. To which the Gemara says, that's a great idea. Either kaboy legvina. If you want to make cheese, then that's a great way to test out if there's any non-kosher milk involved. What's the case over here? The case over here is I'm not buying it for cheese. Instead, what am I buying it for? I'll say everyone's favorite dish, kusach. Kamcha, Rashi points out over here, is a maichal, also known as kusach. So again, because of that, there's no way for me to tell if there's non-kosher milk mixed in there, and therefore halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to go ahead and purchase, or you're not allowed to get milk from an akum out of concern that he may have mixed in there non-kosher milk. So just take a little bit of the milk and curdle it. In other words, you don't want to curdle the whole thing. Take a little bit of it, curdle it. If it curdles it, it's kosher. If it doesn't curdle it, it's not kosher. To which the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why it's not a good proof, or it's not a good test. Kevan de bitar nami ika nisubi de lokaimi leka lamekam ala de milsa. Here's the difference. Anytime you make cheese, or at least apparently in their cheese, it was very common that you'd always have some leftover milk residue. Not all of the milk curdles, even in a case of totally kosher milk. So therefore, again, even the cheese test doesn't work, because just because you have some leftover milk that didn't curdle is not a raya that it's kosher milk or non-kosher milk, because even kosher milk, there's some leftover milk that doesn't curdle. Therefore, the cheese test will not work to ascertain whether or not there's non-kosher milk mixed in. The other possibility is, furthermore, again, even if you are purchasing the milk, ultimately, again, for cheese, and even if halacha l'maisa, again, you do go ahead and make the cheese, once again, how does that help you? Because halacha l'maisa, once we've established that there is some milk that is always left over in the cheese itself, that could just, it could be kosher milk that just didn't coagulate, or it could be non-kosher milk that can't coagulate. So therefore, bottom line is that the cheese test can't work. So therefore, both say halacha l'maisa, source number one, or say halacha number one, Mishnah says you're not allowed to go ahead and purchase milk from an akum. Why? We are concerned ultimately, again, that the akum mixed in non-kosher milk. Now, again, interestingly enough, I'm not concerned he's selling me just pure non-kosher milk, because that would be distinguishable just by its appearance. What I am concerned about is that he mixed in non-kosher milk with the kosher milk, and there's no real way, the Gemara says, that you're able to ascertain that. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, you can't go ahead and use the milk of an akum. It's aser b'achila, you can't eat it, but ultimately, again, not aser b'ana. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up a message with Pas tomorrow. Shkoyach, everyone.